You've broken up with Marnie 4 times this year, and every single time I'm the one you call at midnight, so I genuinely don't know why I said yes when you asked me to come to the cabin with you a 5th time. That's what I should have said to Jonah, standing in his driveway with a duffel bag and a six-pack of the good root beer he likes, instead of what I actually said, which was, "Yeah, man, of course, when do we leave?" I want to tell this whole thing honestly, even the parts that make me look pathetic, because I think that's the only way it's worth telling. So here's the honest part. I said yes because any excuse to spend 4 days alone with Jonah Rays felt like winning something, even though I knew, the way you know a stove is hot without touching it, that it was going to hurt. We'd been best friends since we were 14, since he moved in 2 houses down and showed up at my door holding a soccer ball and asking if I wanted to kick it around, like that was just a normal thing new kids did in our neighborhood. 10 years later, he still had that same directness, that same unbothered way of walking into a room and making it his. He was also, as far as I knew and as far as he knew, completely straight. Girlfriend since sophomore year of high school. A whole type, loud laughs, favorite band Fleetwood Mac, always a little bit heartbroken by March. I'd watched him fall in and out of love with 4 different women while I sat next to him at 1 a.m. handing him tissues and pretending my own heart wasn't doing something complicated in the background. The mountain trip was his idea. He wanted to clear his head after the latest breakup with Marnie, which had happened dramatically in a Target parking lot over, and I want to be clear, I am not making this up, a disagreement about whether they should get a dog. He texted me a single word, cabin, and I typed back yes before I even fully read the message, which tells you everything you need to know about where my priorities were. We drove up on a Thursday, 4 hours, most of it spent arguing about a podcast neither of us had actually finished, and by the time we got to the cabin, his uncle's place, wood-paneled, smelled like pine and old wood smoke. 1 bedroom with bunk beds because apparently his uncle never expected more than 2 people who didn't mind being 14 again. The sun was already dropping behind the ridge in that orange, dramatic way mountains do just to show off. "This was a good call," Jonah said, standing on the porch with his hands on his hips, looking out at the treeline like he owned it. "I needed this." "You always need this after a breakup. I feel like I should just keep a bag packed." "Shut up." He knocked my shoulder with his, easy, thoughtless, the way he'd done it 1,000 times before, except this time it lingered half a second longer than usual, or maybe I imagined that, which honestly happened a lot with Jonah. I'd built an entire fictional relationship in my head out of half seconds like that. We hiked the next morning, a trail his uncle had recommended, 6 miles up to some overlook that was supposedly worth the burn in your legs. About 2 miles in, Jonah started talking about Marnie, unprompted, the way he always did, working through it out loud like I was some kind of processing station for his feelings. "I don't know, man, I think the dog thing was just, it wasn't really about the dog," he said, stepping over a root. "I think I just didn't want to get a dog with her because some part of me knew we weren't gonna be around in 2 years and getting a dog together felt like lying." That's actually a pretty mature realization. Don't sound so surprised. "I'm not surprised you're capable of it. I'm surprised you got there without me having to drag it out of you first." He laughed, that big unfiltered laugh that used to make my chest hurt when we were 16 and I hadn't figured out yet why it did that. "You always do this thing," he said, "where you ask one question and somehow I end up understanding my whole life better. You should charge for that. I'll invoice you, payment due and root beer." We reached the overlook around noon, and it was one of those views that makes you go quiet without meaning to, ridgeline stacked on top of each other in fatting blues, a hawk riding some current way below eye level, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of something bigger than conversation. We sat on a flat rock and ate sandwiches that had gotten smashed in my bag, and for a while neither of us said anything, and it didn't feel awkward, it felt like something I wanted to bottle. "Can I ask you something?" Jonah said out of nowhere, still looking at the view, "and you have to actually answer, not deflect." My stomach did the thing it always did when he got serious. "Depends what it is. Why haven't you dated anyone in like 2 years?" I hadn't expected that specific bullet, and it caught me off guard enough that I answered too honestly before my filter kicked in. "I don't know, busy I guess, also I don't know, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "Just complicated. Can we not do this on a rock 4,000 feet up? I feel like this is a conversation that needs a couch and a bad TV show playing in the background for plausible deniability." He looked at me a second longer, then felt casual, like he was deciding whether to push, and then he let it go, and I remember feeling both relieved and disappointed, which is a stupid, exhausting combination to feel about one sentence. That night, back at the cabin, we made a fire in the little stone pit out front and sat close to it because the mountain air had turned sharp the second the sun dropped, and he passed me a beer and said, "Okay, truth or truth, no dare option. I want the actual truth." That's just called an interrogation. Fine, call it whatever, answer the question from earlier. I stared at the fire for a second, feeling my heartbeat pick up in this specific, dumb way it did whenever a conversation got near the edge of something I'd spent years keeping fenced off. You really want to do this? I really want to do this. I feel like I've known you for 10 years and there's this whole room in your life I've never been in. That phrase, this whole room in your life, undid something in me because it was so much more perceptive than I expected from a guy who once tried to microwave a metal spoon. Okay, I said. Okay, complicated meaning I like someone, have liked someone for a long time, and it's not really a situation where I can do anything about it, so I've just sort of stopped dating other people because it feels like going through the motions. Who is it? Jonah. No, I mean who's the person? I know what you meant. My hands had started sweating, actual physical proof of how scared I was, and I almost laughed at myself for how badly my body was betraying me. I'm not gonna tell you who. It doesn't matter, it's not a realistic thing anyway. Why not? Because the person's straight, I said, and the second it left my mouth I realized how much I'd given away. How the sentence only worked in a world where he already knew I liked guys, and I watched something shift behind his eyes as he did the math in real time. Wait, he said slowly, you like guys. I felt the whole night narrow down to that one beat, the crackle of the fire suddenly too loud, my own pulse louder than that. Yeah, I said. I do, I have for a while, I just never brought it up because it never seemed like it mattered, and then it got to a point where not saying it felt like its own thing and I didn't know how to undo that. He was quiet for what felt like an unbearable amount of time, poking at the fire with a stick like it needed his full attention. And I braced myself for something, not rejection exactly. Jonah wasn't like that, but maybe distance, maybe the careful weirdness people get when a friendship shifts shape without warning. Okay, he said finally, thank you for telling me I know that's probably not easy. It's not really. 10 years though, 10 years and you never. I didn't know how, I said. And also, if I'm honest, some of it was selfish. I liked having you not know, it meant I got to keep this normal, easy version of us a little longer. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me, and then he asked the question I hadn't expected, the one that cracked the whole night open. Is it me? I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My whole body had gone very still, the way it does right before you jump into cold water, that half second where you already know it's going to shock you and there's nothing you can do to prepare. Jonah, you don't have to lie to protect me, he said, quieter now. I'd rather know. Yeah, I said finally, so quiet I wasn't sure the fire didn't eat the word before it reached him. It's you. It's been you for a long time. I'm sorry, I know that probably makes tonight weird. I know you're straight, I'm not trying to. Hey, he said it firmly enough that I stopped talking, stop apologizing for a second. We sat there, both staring at the fire instead of each other, which felt safer somehow, like the flames were absorbing some of the tension neither of us knew what to do with. I'm not mad, he said after a while. I want to say that first because I can feel you bracing for something and I don't want you bracing. I'm not upset, I'm just surprised, I guess, and also not surprised, which doesn't make sense, but it's true. What do you mean not surprised? He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he was uncomfortable, one I'd cataloged without meaning to over a decade of knowing him. I don't know, there's always been something about us that felt different than other friendships I have. I never really let myself think about what that meant. I think I just filed it under we're close, easier than asking questions I didn't have room for. You don't have to say that to make me feel better. I'm not. He finally looked at me, firelight doing something unfair to the shape of his face, and his voice had gone lower, rougher, less certain than I'd ever heard it. I'm serious. There's stuff I've never told anyone. Like, okay, this is going to sound insane, but sophomore year when you had that boyfriend for like 3 weeks, that Daniel kid. Oh God, don't bring up Daniels. I hated him, Jonah said, instantly, and I told myself it was because he was kind of a jerk and he was, but that wasn't the whole reason, and I never let myself sit with what the whole reason actually was. My heart was doing something violent and unreasonable in my chest. What are you saying right now? I don't fully know. he admitted, and there was something almost relieving about the confusion in his voice, like it made mine feel less alone. I've only ever dated girls. I've never even considered anything else. But sitting here with you just telling me the truth, I keep thinking about all these moments I never let myself examine, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, I said, even though every part of me wanted him to do something with it immediately, wanted some kind of resolution, wanted the fear in my chest to have somewhere to go. I didn't tell you this so you'd have some crisis about it. I told you because I was tired of it being this locked room. I know, I appreciate that, I do. He was quiet for a second. But I also don't want to just shove it back in a drawer because it's inconvenient timing. That feels like a coward's move, and I've made that move with basically every relationship I've had this year. We didn't solve anything that night. We couldn't have, it was too big, too sudden, and I think we both knew that pushing it further right then would have been more about the adrenaline of the fire and the dark than anything real. We went to bed in our separate bunks, and I lay awake a long time listening to him, not sleeping either, both of us pretending, out of some mutual unspoken agreement, that we weren't lying there thinking about the same conversation. The next day was strange in the specific way days are strange after you've said something you can't take back. We were careful with each other, overly polite, laughing a beat too hard at things that weren't that funny, the way people do when they're covering for something neither of them knows how to name yet. We hiked a shorter trail because neither of us had the stomach for 6 miles of forced conversation, and around the 3rd mile he stopped walking. Can we just talk about it properly, he said, instead of doing this thing where we both pretend we're fine? Okay. I've been thinking about it all night, like actually thinking, not just spiraling. He sat down on a fallen log and I sat next to him, close enough that our knees almost touched, which felt loaded in a way it never had before. I don't think I've ever let myself want anything that didn't fit the shape I was supposed to want. Girls, careers, whatever, I just kind of took the shape everyone handed me and lived inside it. And I think somewhere in there I buried a version of myself that maybe wanted something different, because it was easier than figuring out what that would mean. That's a really big realization to have on a hiking trail. I know, I feel insane saying it out loud. He laughed, short and a little nervous, nothing like his usual big careless laugh. I'm not saying I have this all figured out. I don't know what I am or what this means, or if I'm just having some kind of quarter-life crisis because Marnie broke up with me over a dog. But I know that when you said it was me, I didn't feel disgusted or weirded out or any of the things I think I would have predicted if you'd asked me a week ago how I'd react to that. I felt, I don't know, seen maybe, which is a strange thing to feel about your best friend confessing he's had feelings for you for years, but that's the honest answer. I didn't know what to say, so for once I didn't say anything, just let him keep going because it felt like he needed to get it all out before he lost his nerve. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I've figured out my whole identity in 24 hours, he said. That would be a lie, and you deserve better than a lie, especially about this. But I also don't want to just go back to normal like nothing happened, because something did happen, and pretending otherwise feels worse than sitting in the discomfort of not having an answer yet. So what do we do? I don't know, maybe nothing for now. Maybe we just let it be true that this is confusing and give it time instead of deciding anything today. He looked at me and there was something different in his face, something less certain and more open than I'd ever seen from him. Is that okay? Is that a fair thing to ask of you? It's more than fair, I said, even though some greedy part of me wanted him to close the distance right then, wanted certainty, wanted the kind of ending you get in movies where the confusion resolves itself in one clean scene. Real life doesn't work that way though, and some part of me, the part that had loved him carefully and quietly for years, understood that rushing him toward certainty would only break something that deserved more patience than that. We didn't kiss on that trip. I want to be honest about that too, because I think if I made this into some neat little story where the mountain air fixed everything in 4 days, it would stop feeling true. What we did instead was talk, more than we ever had in 10 years of friendship, about things neither of us had let ourselves examine, his endless string of relationships that never quite fit, the reasons I'd stayed quiet so long, the strange shape our friendship had always had that we'd both, in our own ways, avoided naming. The drive home was different from the drive up, quieter but not in an uncomfortable way, more like the quiet after you've said something true and you're both still sitting inside it. Somewhere around the 2nd hour, without either of us planning it, his hand ended up resting near mine on the console, close enough that our fingers brushed at every bump in the road and neither of us moved away. It took another 6 weeks after that trip for anything to actually shift into words. 6 weeks of him texting me more than usual, of him showing up at my apartment with no real reason, of both of us circling something neither of us was brave enough to name outright. Then one night in October, sitting on my couch watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to, he turned to me and said, quiet, almost scared, I think I want to try, whatever this is. I don't know what it makes me and I don't need to know right this second, but I know I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel something. Are you sure? No, he said and laughed a little, nervous and honest. I'm not sure of anything right now except that I don't want to lose whatever this is between us by being too scared to try it. I remember thinking right then that 10 years of quiet, careful loving had led to this exact, unremarkable living room, this exact, unfinished movie, this exact, uncertain sentence, and that it was somehow more romantic than anything I could have written for us if I'd tried. We kissed that night, finally clumsy and a little unsure, both of us laughing afterward out of nerves more than anything else, and it didn't fix 10 years of quiet in one motion because things like that don't work that way. But it was a start, an honest one, built out of a mountain, a fire, an unplanned confession, and a friendship that turned out to be sturdier than either of us gave it credit for. It's been a year and a half now. He still doesn't have a tidy label for what he is, and I've stopped needing him to have one, because I've learned that some people find their way toward truth slowly in pieces, and that the slowness isn't a lack of certainty, it's just honesty taking its time. We went back to that same cabin this past summer, sat on that same rock at the overlook, and he laughed that big unguarded laugh of his and said, remember when I asked if it was me and you looked like you were about to throw up? I remembered. Good, he said and took my hand like it was the easiest thing in the world, like it always had been. Because I think about that moment more than almost anything else in my life. The exact second everything I thought I knew about myself got quietly, permanently rearranged. I think about it too. Not the fear of that night, though there was plenty of that, but the strange grace of it that somewhere on a cold mountainside, 10 years of careful silence finally became something honest enough to hold, and neither of us had to pretend anymore.